Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are across the globe. We are your hosts, Shawn Alvari, and yours truly, Shayon Jalayer, and you are about to experience the S2 effect. Today, all things U.S. men's national team. Kick the intro. Yeah, so I guess we should start somewhat at the beginning of kind of the U.S. soccer, and I would use the federations, U.S. soccer federations, push to kind of set these protocols to get the U.S. men's national team on a consistent platform, qualifying for World Cups, and that initially started kind of in the mid to late '80s, culminating in the 1990 qualification of the World Cup. And I don't know if you recall, but we were in a must-win match away to Trinidad and Tobago, and Paul Caligiuri hits a really actually a really good goal uh, that kind of sends shockwaves around the world because it was the first time since the 1950s that I believe that we actually qualified for World Cup. And I'm not even sure at that time in the 1950s. I think those were invites, and a lot of teams back in those days would turn down World Cup invitations because of uh, the effort it took to put together a team and the money that it took to travel. So, for the first time in the modern era of football, U.S. soccer qualified. And what was so special about it is that we qualified basically on the heels of first and foremost, it was done so with a U.S. coach, and then you know, basically college players, amateurs at the time. And I guess the biggest question that everybody wants to know is, that I get asked a lot as a former player, as a former teammate, a lot of these guys is how good were these guys? How good were you in comparison to these guys? And I just have a lot of respect for anyone who was a pioneer of the game. And for me, being teammates of Bruce Murray, John Kerr Jr., John Stolmeyer, Desmond Armstrong. These were guys that were not only role models and mentors to me, but quite honestly, in comparison to what we see today, were just as talented. And so the bigger question is, could those guys have survived in today's game? And I emphatically believe that they were full of ability, uh, and they had grit and toughness, and they had something that I think a lot of times that we don't really put value on, but they were hungry, right? I mean, they were trying to not only make a name for themselves, they were not only trying to uh, create opportunities for themselves, but they really took upon themselves as being a group that said, hey, if soccer is going to succeed in a professional environment in this country, we're going to have to make it happen. And so they had a lot of responsibility, and I have just so much respect for those guys. Um, you know, I, I even played with a former Team America player, Washington Diplomat player by the name of Sonny Askew, who I also feel like was an amazing player. And I think all these guys would be reaping the rewards right now, with the way the modern game is and how U.S. soccer is at this point.
No, that's greatly said, Shy. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more about hunger and grit. And I think on our previous episode of Maradona, we were talking about that, how in that era there was so much hunger. And there's not no knock with today's generation. I think we're evolving with technology and so much stuff. The game is evolving. It's looking much more beautiful, and they're trying to make it look more beautiful, and the technical support and development is so much more. But that hunger, that heart within inside, like I even if I go to myself, sometimes when you look at the players and they're so talented, there's so much potential. You're like, man, it's, with the technology, there's so much distractions. And just to wake up certain X amount of mornings to get that grind in, day out, I think it evolved. But it's kind of like a comparison if we even talk about Apple, the iPhone, and how it evolved from the iPhone 1 to all the way to the 12. It's the same thing. I think, Shah, you were a player back in the 80s as well as 90s. And whatever you learned as a player and you didn't like or liked, you incorporated in your methodology as a coach today to evolve the players that are coming in our next generation. And that's how we're evolving to become even better, because the trial and errors that you guys saw that didn't work and the coaches you had were going from the previous history. And that's how we are taking the game to the better place. But every generation is kind of, if you want to say, be that stepping stone to kind of use it. And it's like that ball that's bouncing on the staircases going down is just a stepping stone. And we're just trying to take care of it in a right way to go. But beautifully said. I mean, my thing, if we go from Paul Caligari's goal and then go kind of fast forward into 2002, I think 1998 was significant, but I think 2002 was another coming out with even Landon Donovan. And I think sometimes we forget with now today's generation how good Landon Donovan was. I mean, in that 2002 World Cup, he was exceptional, amazing pace, was going at players. And I think they they were so close to even beating Germany. They were so close to beating Germany that went all the way to the finals and the quarterfinals. And they really put US as a contender. And they were like, oh, US has arrived, and kind of set up for 2006 going in. I mean, what's your thoughts on that kind of World Cup? And what's your thoughts on Landon Donovan on what he's done from Paul Caligari's moment?
Yeah, kind of, springboarding from the 1990 group and then the 1994 group. What I think you saw was an evolution of basically some players who grew up for between 90 and 94. I think the 94 World Cup kind of put it in our cultural psyche, right? I think soccer became once again, um, if anything before the 90s, soccer was kind of like a fringe sport. Um, I hate to kind of throw that out. It's the sport that the foreign kids play, or the immigrant kids play. And then as you get these guys who are giving success, and then 94, it becomes part of our cultural psyche. Um, you know, Again, I think there's an old saying that I live by, that if you don't learn from the past, you're condemned to repeat it, right? And I think what U.S. soccer was aware of was how to promote the game, uh, and slow the process down. And a big part of that was the development of a league where players could hone their ability. They could hone their craft and make a living at it. And yeah, everybody was pushing, hey, you got to go abroad and you got to. So the 1994 World Cup basically launched this process of saying that, not only can we put on an event, but we can sustain soccer as a professional sport. And I think prior to that, in the leagues that I was playing in, you were kind of playing part-time, between outdoor, sometime indoor. The indoor leagues were kind of coming towards an end, and there was this real push to kind of really professionalize the outdoor game. And where I'm going with this is this, that I don't think people realize the importance of the development of Major League Soccer, and how the US Soccer Federation and the US soccer team, the national team, kind of propelled MLS in order to make these things happen. So you get a generation of, players like DeMarcus Beasley and Landon Donovan, but also guys who are still around playing were Kobe Jones and a lot of these other players that used. And if you remember, I mean, you had guys like Eddie Pope who were a part of that team. These are Major League Soccer guys. And so what I think 2002 showed was how important it is to have an established professional soccer environment, so players are in a professional environment day in and day out. And then you get to a point where you get, players who are now experienced from previous World Cups, kind of handing the torch over to this up and coming, you know, youth national team products who, quite frankly, I think were the first group to kind of have this mentality of, I don't care how old I am, I don't care what you think about me. They had this kind of, you know,
Aura.
aura, but I would even say arrogance. But
Mm.
it was a refreshing arrogance in the sense that, once again, it's something that's needed to take the next step.